The story begins in 2010. InGen, a genetic company, established a dinosaur research laboratory in a remote area of the Atlantic Ocean called St. Hubert. This location was used to conduct experiments, including transgenics and mutations on dinosaurs. One of their creations was a deformed six-legged Tyrannosaurus, nicknamed the T-Rex. Unfortunately, the terrifying creature managed to escape from the containment center due to the negligence of an employee who forgot to throw away the trash properly.
Okay, what?
Labs, but I assume we horrifics?
Yeah.
Oh god, it's loose! The T-Rex broke free!
Please, just turn the camera.
17 years later, or to be exact, in the year 2027, most of Earth's climate has now become inhospitable for the dinosaurs, forcing these creatures to seek warmer places by spreading across the globe between 2018 and 2022. All the remaining dinosaurs managed to survive in areas around the equator where the conditions, both the vegetation and the overall environment, are very similar to what existed 60 million years ago, making these regions now strictly off limits to visit. Meanwhile, in the middle of a traffic jam in New York City, Martin Krebs, an executive at a pharmaceutical company called Parker Genix, is seen stuck in traffic which is caused by an Apatosaurus. Martin then meets Zora Bennett, a former military secret agent. Martin intends to recruit Zora with the goal of collecting biomaterial samples from dinosaurs on an island in order to find a cure for heart disease. At first, Zora refuses because she knows that the place they are going to is extremely dangerous and strictly off limits to anyone. However, because Martin offers a large sum of money, Zora eventually accepts. From there, they then go to a museum to meet Dr. Henry Loomis, who will also be participating in the mission. By the way, Henry was Ellen Grant's student before he earned his PhD. Inside the museum, Henry explains that they need to collect DNA from the three largest dinosaurs: Titanosaurus, which lives on land, Mosasaurus, which lives in the sea, and Quetzalcoatlus, which lives in the air. Upon hearing this, Zora is momentarily shocked because she didn't expect that they would be taking samples from living dinosaurs, which is obviously far more dangerous than she had imagined. However, even so, Zora has already accepted the mission, so she doesn't question it. Actually, Henry also didn't want to join this expedition because aside from being illegal, it would also put all his academic titles at risk. But ever since people started getting bored with dinosaurs, which eventually caused his museum to experience a decline in visitors, especially since as a child he never interacted with dinosaurs directly, only through enclosures like those in the past. The next day, Zora, Henry, and Martin went to Paramaribo, Suriname to recruit Zora's old friend named Duncan Kincaid. At the same time, Duncan would be the one to arrange their transportation. They met Duncan at a bar. When they met, Duncan initially refused to help them. However, when Martin agreed to double their pay, Duncan had no choice but to join them. Besides Duncan, they also met a head of security named Bobby. There was also a boat driver named Leclerc and a mercenary named Nina. Next, they set off for their destination, which was St. Hubert. So the first hunt is to obtain a sample from the Mosasaurus. Martin explained that before escaping from the InGen breeding center on St. Hubert Island, the company Parker Genix had obtained the tracking code so they could determine the creature's whereabouts. From there, Henry then showed the others how the extraction device works. Basically, once the weapon is fired and hits the target, the device will quickly draw blood, and when it's done,
We'll back down the U.S.
Meanwhile, several miles away, there was a group of people sailing in the middle of the sea. Their names were Ruben, along with his two daughters, Isabella and Teresa, and also Teresa's boyfriend, Xavier. Now, while they were enjoying this moment together, their boat was suddenly attacked by a Mosasaurus.
Grab the wheel! Get us off!
Fortunately, the four of them managed to survive the brutal attack by the giant creature. Ruben, who had managed to bring a radio, then tried to call for help from anyone who could hear them. Their call for help was only answered and received the next morning when Duncan heard the emergency call. From there, Duncan immediately informed his group about the discovery. Zora agreed to carry out the rescue mission. Meanwhile, Bobby firmly opposed it, as did Martin, who disagreed because he believed they could lose track of the Mosasaurus. However, as the owner of the boat, Duncan ultimately stood by his decision, and he then gave new instructions to carry out the rescue mission.
Declare new course. Blank speed. Aye, aye.
Once they were rescued, they learned that Ruben's family had been attacked by a mosasaurus. Zora then asked, why did the mosasaurus attack a boat? Henry, who heard this, replied by saying that the creature might have seen Ruben's family boat as a threat. The problem is, Ruben's family couldn't simply be dropped off, whether at the dock or on the nearest island, which left them feeling confused. Martin suggested that Ruben and his children join them to go to an island, where there were many villages belonging to the local residents, as well as various facilities. However, in the end, Ruben's family's confusion was finally resolved after they found out that the people who rescued them were actually hunting dinosaurs and that the mosasaurus had now been detected approaching them.
Oh, come on, guys.
Okay, it's fine. Okay, so we just got...
Let's go! Ah! It's beautiful!
The sampling process then immediately began. Accompanied by Henry, Zora then moved to the front of the boat. Henry explained that Zora needed a distance of about 10 meters for the needle to be able to stick in and function properly. Unfortunately, just as they were about to reach the ideal distance, the mosasaurus suddenly dove and resurfaced very quickly, causing Zora to accidentally fire the weapon. Zora then asked Henry to get a new needle. At this moment, Zora almost fell and became a meal for the mosasaurus. But fortunately, Henry saved her just in time, allowing Zora to fire her shot accurately. Amidst the celebration of their success, Henry took a moment to share his personal thoughts with Zora, saying that they probably shouldn't give the dinosaur DNA to Martin. According to Henry, people like Martin would only create medicine that could be bought by the wealthy. Henry preferred that the sample be given to someone who could distribute it to various groups in order to help more people. However, despite that, it turned out that Zora did not agree with Henry's intentions, as she preferred to stick to their original agreement, even though she was actually aware that Henry's plan could be considered very noble. Next, just as things were starting to calm down, they were suddenly startled by the appearance of a mosasaurus. But this time, the creature arrived while bringing along 3 Spinosaurus. Upon realizing this, Henry explained that the Spinosaurus had come to help the mosasaurus hunt. In response, Bobby immediately went outside with his weapon already loaded with neurotoxin. Unfortunately, when Bobby fired, he was instead attacked by a Spinosaurus and dragged right in front of Isabella. Not long after that, it was the Mosasaurus's turn to attack, causing the boat to rock and making several people nearly fall overboard. This included Nina and Isabella, who both almost got eaten by the Spinosaurus. Realizing the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous, Duncan quickly started the boat and took them toward the shallow waters of Seinhuber Island. At this moment, Ruben and his family decided to put on their life jackets. Here, he also asked Teresa to send their coordinates to the rescue team. Martin, who didn't want his illegal expedition plan to be discovered, then chased after Teresa and tried to stop her. Martin's actions caused Teresa to fall and hang on to the edge of the boat. Instead of helping, Martin let Teresa fall into the water. Seeing his girlfriend fall, Xavier quickly jumped into the water. Ruben did the same thing, jumping in as well while carrying his youngest daughter. Meanwhile, Zora and her team on the boat kept trying to fend off the attack from the Mosasaurus. But since their boat was badly damaged, they asked Zora and the others to jump off immediately. Meanwhile, she and Likla would carefully try to steer the boat to the shore. Teresa and her boyfriend Xavier managed to swim closer to the edge of the island. Here, Teresa then revealed that someone had let her fall from the boat. Eventually, Teresa reunited with her father and her younger sibling, and together they began to look for help. Meanwhile, on the island's beach, Henry tried to warn the others to leave the shore immediately because he believed there was still a group of Spinosaurus that could attack them on land. And sure enough, without their knowledge, a Spino silently attacked Nina, who happened to be gathering supplies.
Nina! Nina! Nina!
Realizing that now is not the time to grieve, Zora and her team then begin to inspect every piece of equipment they manage to salvage. When talking to Martin, Zora questions what is actually on this island. At first, Martin doesn't want to talk about it, but after being repeatedly questioned, he finally reveals that this island was once used as a laboratory to crossbreed several species, all at the request of the amusement park owner who had grown bored with the same old dinosaur appearances. That's why, from that moment on, the process of genetic modification began to satisfy their desires, and for the creatures deemed unfit to be displayed in the amusement park, they would be left here under very strict supervision. Now that Zora and her team have arrived at their destination, Zora then begins to explain the next plan. While walking into the forest, Zora says that she has hired a rescue team to monitor the radio frequency on their boat. If the team does not receive any news within 24 hours, they will carry out a pickup around the island area. Meanwhile, Ruben and his family, who are trying to find a settlement, manage to discover geothermal energy pipes belonging to the InGen company. Here, Ruben suspects that the pipe was probably built leading to a village. Okay, let's go back to Zora's group, who are now walking toward the valley, the place where they will later take samples from the largest land dinosaur, the Titanosaurus. On the way, Zora took the opportunity to ask Martin about how Teresa could have fallen from the boat. Because as far as Zora knows, Martin should have been at the edge of the boat's deck, but here Martin apparently chooses to lie instead. Elsewhere, Ruben's family is now seen trying to find a log to use as a tool to clear the path. In the midst of their activity, Isabella suddenly discovers a baby Aquilops. But since this creature isn't dangerous, the father lets it be, though Teresa doesn't feel the same way. Back to Zora's group, who are now almost at the valley. On the way, Martin, who stopped to get some water, accidentally found 2 military dog tags in the river stream. When he looked up, he saw a crashed helicopter, and he also found the body of the pilot, who was still holding a pistol. Meanwhile, Ruben's family, who had been walking for quite a distance, finally decided to take a rest. Tonight, Xavier will stand guard, while Ruben has to rest with his 2 daughters. While Xavier went off to relieve himself, Isabella was startled by the appearance of the Aquilops, which, as it turns out, had been following them ever since their first encounter. And in fact, the creature now seemed even braver, approaching Isabella. On the other hand, Xavier, who was urinating, didn't realize that right behind him, there was a raptor trying to sneak up on him. However, unlucky for the raptor, instead of catching its prey, it ended up becoming prey itself to a creature called the Mutodon. The next day, Zora's group finally arrived at the Green Valley, the place where they would collect samples from the largest land dinosaurs. Several Titanosauruses were found, which left everyone shocked and amazed, including Henry, who in his entire life had never been this close, even close enough to touch a dinosaur's body. Not long after, Zora immediately took advantage of the opportunity to collect blood samples from 2 Titanosauruses that were in the mood to mate, and she managed to do it. Now, with 2 samples in hand, they only needed 1 more, and luckily, the last target was not far from their location. Meanwhile, Ruben's family, who are now seen walking along a pipe, apparently have a new member, as Isabella chooses to bring along and name the little shy Aquilops Dolores. Unfortunately, while Saphir was talking to Teresa, she unexpectedly fell, which then forced the others to follow her. They all ended up stranded in an area, but strangely, that place made Dolores look very frightened. Apparently, Teresa had already spotted a boat on the other side of the river. But the problem is the boat is inside a container, so like it or not, Teresa takes the initiative to get it. But the problem is the boat is inside a container.
Be careful.
Once she reached the other side, Teresa found a Lovosaurus that was eating the carcass of some Saurolopus. But not long after, something even more dangerous appeared when Teresa encountered a T-Rex that had just woken up from its sleep. Feeling afraid, Teresa slowly took the rubber boat out of the container, dragged it to the water, and unfolded it right next to the T-Rex. Things became tense when the T-Rex started chasing Ruben and his family. With all their strength, they tried to hold on. But just as the T-Rex caught up, their boat was flipped over. From there, the T-Rex then tried to attack Ruben, who was drifting in the river. But fortunately, Ruben, Teresa, Xavier, and Isabella managed to survive after hiding behind the crevices of the rocks. Back with Zora's group, they were now on a cliff to collect the last sample from the largest flying dinosaur, the Quetzalcoatlus. The difference this time was that they didn't take it directly from the target, but from its egg, which was the safest and fastest way. In the process, Zora and Henry were inside an ancient nest that had been turned into a lair, where they quickly sped up the process and both managed to collect the sample. Here, Zora then asked what Henry would do with these samples if they didn't hand them over to Parker Genix. Henry replied that he planned to make these samples freely available without any patents so that everyone, including the medical community, could use them. Then suddenly, they were all startled by the appearance of the Indu Quetzalcoatlus, which had returned to its nest. In that incident, Leclerc, who was outside, became the victim after he tried to lure the creature. The same thing happened to Henry, who fell while trying to secure the last sample. Fortunately, Henry managed to land in the river, followed by his friends who also managed to escape. Meanwhile, Ruben's family, who were sailing along the river, eventually arrived at a settlement. Not far from there, Zora and her team also arrived at a facility where they would later be picked up by the rescue team. Long story short, they all met at one point, but as soon as they did, Teresa, still holding a grudge, started looking for Martin, who had suddenly disappeared. Then, from behind the bushes, Martin appeared holding a pistol. The situation became tense when Teresa revealed that Martin had prevented her from asking for help and had even deliberately let her fall into the water. Here, Zora, Duncan, and Henry began to suspect Martin, but ignoring their suspicions, Martin asked for the suitcase containing the sample and then handcuffed it to his own wrist while telling everyone to stay calm. Then, while everyone was arguing, a strange sound suddenly came from the forest. According to Henry, the sound was likely from a generator that had been automatically activated since this facility was established. But what really shocked them was the loud roar coming from the forest, which was then followed by the lights around them turning on and music starting to play again. Unfortunately, because of the sound of the music, two Mutadons suddenly appeared, causing everyone to panic. During the attack, Ruben's family took shelter and held out inside the mini-market with all their strength, then tried to survive an assault by a Mutadon that managed to get in through the roof. Here, Isabella unexpectedly meets Dolores again, which forces Isabella to take her back with them. In the end, the family managed to escape after they found a drainage channel on one of the mini-market's floors. Meanwhile, Zora and Martin, who were still outside, tried to avoid an attack from a Mutadon. They even had to take cover under a parked vehicle, but that didn't last long because as soon as Martin found the keys to the vehicle, he chose to leave alone without caring about Zora. On the other hand, Duncan and Henry, who had managed to evade Mutadon's attack, were now in an abandoned dinosaur breeding laboratory. By carefully examining the map and the surveillance cameras, they eventually discovered that there was a hidden water disposal route they could use to make their escape. And they also found a getaway boat conveniently positioned at the dock. But just as Duncan was about to leave and asked Martin to bring everyone, suddenly a mutant creature called D-Rex appeared after hearing the sound of a helicopter in the distance. Quickly, Henry then ran to signal the rescue team. Henry managed to do it by firing a flare gun, but unfortunately, as the helicopter began to approach, Henry fell into a well.
They're coming back! Duncan!
After that incident, Duncan and Henry then met Ruben's family, who were about to exit the sewer. However, since they could no longer use the air duct to get out, their only option was to follow the end of the sewer, which would eventually lead to the sea. From there, they could use the boat that had previously been seen on the surveillance camera. Meanwhile, during his escape, Martin drove the vehicle at high speed toward the dock. He made a lot of noise, and Martin even nearly collided with a dinosaur. On the other hand, Zora, who was searching for the others in the sewer, finally managed to find everyone. However, realizing that a Mutadon had appeared, Zora immediately opened fire and killed the creature. From there, they all ran toward the dock to prevent Martin from getting to the boat first. But unfortunately, when they arrived, their path was blocked, and the only way to open it was to send Isabel out through the metal gap to press the button outside. In the middle of that process, suddenly a Mutadon appeared from behind. And not only that, just as Isabel was outside, D-Rex also unexpectedly showed up, putting Zora and the others in a desperate situation. But very fortunately, Martin arrived on the scene at an incredibly high speed, successfully distracting the full attention of the D-Rex.
Access speed. Slow. Caution, pedestrian ahead.
After successfully taking advantage of the moment and escaping from the disposal chute, Zora quickly closed the gate, which prevented the Mutadon inside from getting out. From there, Zora then picked up the suitcase that had fallen from Martin's severed hand, and together with the other group members, she ran toward the boat. But not long after arriving at the dock, they faced a new problem. The crane to lower the boat was jammed, and while they were trying to fix it, that terrifying creature suddenly appeared again. Now Duncan, who knew that the creature was attracted to light, tried to distract it using a flare. At this moment, Duncan asked Zora to take everyone away using the boat, while he would lure the creature as far away as possible.
Save them! Come on! Come on! Ah! Duncan! Come on! Let's go! Come on!
After successfully avoiding the creature, Zora and the others are now engulfed in sorrow. However, their sadness doesn't last long, because suddenly a flare is fired into the sky, which at the same time confirms that Dan actually managed to survive. Next, on the way home, Zora asks Henry who they will give these samples to later. Hearing this, Henry then leaves the decision up to Zora herself. From here, Zora finally decides to agree to give the samples they obtained to everyone without exception. That was the story of the film Jurassic World River, which was just released this year. A dinosaur movie that is very entertaining and quite thrilling. Even though there isn't an ultimate showdown, this film is still okay to watch with your family. Alright, that's all for our story today. Thank you and see you again next time.